Let me clarify. This happened during my college's Halloween celebration a few years ago, and it's the most terrifying experience of my life. One of my roommates, some friends and myself, left to go to a party around dusk, and we were catcalled by a group of 3 drifters, or homeless people. We thought nothing of it and went on our merry way. About 4 hours later, we're going back to our apartment to change shoes. High heels and messed up streets are hell when you've been drinking. When one of the drifters calls out to me,
"Hey beautiful, how about a kiss?"
Me being a little drunk and sassy, I reply, "No thanks, girls are more my type." To my shock and horror, he says,
"Hey, my friend here likes the ladies."
A homeless girl comes out of nowhere and proceeds to kiss me on the mouth. My friend picks me up and throws me over his shoulder. I proceed to flip the fuck out in my apartment, shrug it off, and we venture back out. Well, I got separated from my group in the crowd, and then I see the 3 drifters again. I try not to show that I'm shitting bricks when they ask me where they can find a liquor store. I point down the street to the Kroger, and they say,
"Okay, you can show us."
I'm a small woman, and they shove me into their vehicle. I think, naively at the time, that they will literally let me out at the grocery store. Except it's closed because it's after midnight. I plead for them to let me out of the car, but they keep saying,
"The power does what it wants,"
and headed away from the safety of the campus area, onto the freeway and out of the state. For the next 4 hours, I visited 3 states with them, all while pleading for my life. I'll never forget how they kept saying,
"The power does what it wants,"
and talking about how they're going to have fun with me. I kind of resigned myself to the fact that I was going to die, that I would never graduate college or see my family again. They pulled into a gas station, and I slipped out the vehicle, just to be grabbed again. But I screamed my head off for the clerk to help. That's when they started talking about taking me to the cliff. I mentioned that my family is full of police officers, and that they're probably already looking for me, how they're committing a federal crime, and that I won't press charges if they take me back to campus. I guess that's when the girl started to feel sorry for me, because she started to say, "Guys, she's really scared. Maybe we should just drop her off somewhere. This doesn't have to get any worse." They took me back to the campus area, and as soon as the girl pulled me out of the car, a police officer called my name. The girl shoved me toward the cop and yelled, "The power does what it wants, and tonight it lets you live." I've never been so happy to sit in a cruiser. They pursued them, but I don't know if they were ever caught. My roommate dropped out of college and joined the military, and I transferred to another school. So, ladies and gentlemen, please be careful walking at night. Always keep your cell phone with you, if possible, and call the police if you see suspicious people near your apartment. I had a brush with death that day, and I am so grateful for the time I have now. This happened the night before Halloween, back in 2010. At that time, I was a freshman in college, living on campus. That year, the 31st fell on a Monday, so student festivities went on the Sunday before. During the afternoon at around 7, I was outside playing soccer on a field near my place, and I noticed an SUV driving by several times. I only noticed this vehicle because we kicked the ball over the fence several times, and that car was present at least twice when we were climbing the fence to get the ball. I didn't think much of it and proceeded to go to a party later that night. My girlfriend, a few friends, and I left at around 9:30 p.m., and we noticed a helicopter in the sky with a bright floodlight attached to it, seemingly scanning the area. We proceeded to the party and didn't fret over it. The party was on the other side of campus, so we missed all the sirens and flashing lights racing up and down the street. I'm getting ahead of myself here. Let me go back. We got back from the party at around 11 p.m., and I immediately noticed that not only was the first helicopter still in the air around my on-campus apartment, there was a steady stream of police cars, ambulances, and fire trucks driving up and down the street nearby. However, none of them had their lights on, nor sirens, so I wasn't alarmed. The next day, the internet informed me that an SUV was found ablaze in a parking lot with a woman's body inside. This happened about half a mile to 3/4 of a mile from where I live. I guess during the party, the area was crawling with police and other authorities, all trying to look for clues. My roommate later told me that there was non-stop sirens for a good 20 minutes after I left for the party. In the next few weeks, more info surfaced, saying that a man killed his wife and tried to burn the body. He broke her neck as well as bludgeoned her body. If the news articles are to be trusted, the killer was lighting his wife's body on fire during the same time I was getting dressed up in my Woody costume for a party. It wasn't until a few weeks later that I made the connection with the SUV I saw while playing soccer earlier in the day. I find that very chilling that while I was playing soccer, someone was driving within 20 yards of me with a corpse in their car, especially since it was on a campus of a seemingly secure university in a very safe city. Halloween has, unfortunately, never been a big deal out here in Scotland, and that's always bummed me out because I love Halloween. But after this year, I think I'll be happy never celebrating it again. My street and the next street over have a lot of young kids who go out trick-or-treating, so while I was out shopping all day with my mom, we decided to pick up some sweets in case anyone came to our door. I had plans to go to the cinema to see a Ouija with my boyfriend, so when I got home, I was getting myself ready to go out, and my mom was busy putting the groceries away, so when the first load of kids came to the door, I was the one who had to answer it. There were children from our street and the next one over, and some I couldn't recognize, as well as an adult at the back of the path. I guessed either a father or an older brother by their size, and they were all dressed in black and had some sort of mask covering their faces, but it wasn't anything I recognized from a movie or anything. Anyway, they all told me their jokes and I gave them their treats, and they made their way back down the path and on to the next house. I was about to close the door when I noticed that the guy with the kids was still standing at the end of my path. He hadn't noticed, and he wasn't watching the children either. He was looking right at me, and my skin started to crawl when I realized that he was just staring. I backed slowly into the house and watched him as he raised his hand and waved very slowly at me. And I was about to call out to him when my mom came to the door to make sure I was alright. And he took off in the opposite way from the children. He hadn't been with them at all, and he left as soon as he realized that I wasn't home alone. I was completely freaked out, and I told my boyfriend all about it when he came to the house to pick me up. But I quickly forgot about it while we were watching the movie. When I finally got home, it was getting really late and trick-or-treating was well and truly over. When I got inside, my mom was just getting ready to take the dogs out for a walk so they could do their last-minute business, and they would meet my dad on his way home from work, so I was going to be home alone. I don't really like being home alone, and it's worse on Halloween. Anyway, I was home alone, and I grabbed some snacks and went up to my bedroom and onto my computer so that I could do some of my writing, scroll through Tumblr, and listen to music. We have a motion censored light attached to the wall of our house right outside my window. Normally, it will go off whenever a cat walks along our fence, but it will usually go off after a couple of minutes. I always know when the light has come on because it lights up my whole room, given where it's placed. And while I was sitting at my computer, the light came on. I ignored it at first because I knew that it would go off soon, but 5 minutes passed and it still hadn't gone off. So I opened my blinds to have a look outside and see what was going on. My stomach almost fell out of my ass when I looked out and saw the creep from hours before sitting on my fence, waving at my window to keep the light on. His waving slowed down suddenly when he spotted me, and it was all seriously creepy again, and I didn't know what to do. Luckily, I heard the front door open and my parents coming into the house with the dogs, so I rushed down the stairs and started screaming at them about the guy on the fence. My dad didn't question me, he just took the dogs and rushed through the house, threw the back door open, and ran outside. And then I heard him shouting, "Get the fuck out of here, you creep! I'm going to phone the police." My dad scared him off, but I convinced him not to call the police because I didn't want to relive the whole thing again. I just wanted to go to sleep and forget all about the whole night. So, to the creepy guy in the mask, waving at me from the end of my path and sitting on my fence, let's not meet.
I'm a female, and I was about 7 years old when this happened. My sister was about 5. One day, sometime in October before Halloween, we were outside playing right by the front porch. My mom makes these awesome homemade ghost decorations to hang in the trees, and as we were big on holidays in my family, the yard was pretty heavily decorated. This man pulls up to our yard, driving really slowly, and comes to a stop right in front of our house. My sister, being the naturally suspicious one, backed up slowly until she was standing on our steps and just kind of watched him warily. I, being the more naive and trusting one, stepped forward a little to see what he wanted. I looked him over, and as he appeared to be a grandpa, probably in his 70s with white hair and glasses, I judged him to be safe enough. He sat there for a minute as if he was looking over our yard, though in retrospect, he was probably looking more at us. And then he started talking to me. Well, he was speaking fairly quietly, considering I was a good 20 to 30 feet away, so I stepped a little closer. He kept talking, and it seemed like every time I get closer, he'd lower his voice, and in turn, I'd scoot closer. This went on until I was about 5 feet from his door. Finally, I could hear what he was saying. He was telling me how spooky our yard looked, and what pretty girls we were. At this point, my sister realized something was off. I still had no idea, and she sprinted inside, screaming for my mom. The minute my mom came out onto the porch, the guy took off. I didn't realize until that moment that something wasn't right. I'm still super grateful that my sister at that age was smarter and more suspicious than I was.
My dad was the coolest guy on the block, probably because he's one of 3 black dads who lived in our town. The population is around 98% Caucasian, and that's not an exaggeration. He was a state police officer, intimidating, wore Oakleys before the hipsters, and he was generally a rough-sounding person. Damn, do I miss him. But the one thing he feared the most was Halloween. He would tell my sister and I stories at night about his life when he was in high school in the slums of New Jersey, and that every Halloween, crazy things would happen. He may have been pulling our legs a bit, but we didn't care. When Halloween would roll around, he would take us out while Mom stayed back to trick or treat. One night, in 5th grade, my sister and I were dressed as a witch and a 50s poodle skirt girl. Dad held our hands, walking to the last street, when I realized I'd lost my mom's scarf she let me borrow. She loved that thing, so we walked all the way back towards the darker corner of the street. It's by the woods and a small stream, but when it's dark, you can't see anything. Dad said he'd seen something and walked towards it. When he got there, he started slowing down. He was staring at something in the dark that we couldn't see. My sister called out to him if he found Mom's scarf. He told her to be quiet and started crouching down, looking into the distance. For several moments, we stood there, waiting. I could make out the scarf above his head tied to a branch. He grabbed the scarf, still staring in the dark, and started backing away. Then Dad screamed and sort of shuffled backwards. It was a low, throaty scream like he was furious. He was swearing too, but I don't remember what. Whatever Dad had been staring at then bolted out the trees and ran down the street opposite of where we lived. It was a little child, probably a boy, from his silhouette, in a black costume with skeleton bones on the front and a skull mask. When my sister and I tried to go over and see what happened, my dad yelled for us to stay back. He got onto his ancient cell phone and called Mom to come and pick us up. His next call was to the local police. We left before we could see anything, but the next day, Mom told us about the dead, skinned animals that had been found. By the time us kids could look, they taped off the place and taken out the bloody animals, but there were still stains on the pavement and the smell was pretty bad. The kids talked about it at school a little, and I was curious if they ever caught the boy. Nothing came out in the local papers though, and it was quickly forgotten. Eventually, Dad could have told me more, but unfortunately, it was the last Halloween we'd ever spend together. But I do remember him and Mom arguing for the next couple of days about ever letting us go trick-or-treating again. Back in 2008, I graduated high school, but was still living at my parents' house, along with my younger brother and sister, who at the time were in high school and junior high respectively. It was Halloween Eve, meaning the next day was Halloween, and we were all asleep in our beds. Now, I have to tell you that although we lived on a nicer street, we lived in a town known for gangs and drug deals and random crazy weirdos. It was a little scary to hear gunshots and police sirens in the too close for comfort distance every night, but hey, it was home. Anywho, at about 4 a.m., I woke up to what sounded like a gunshot on our front porch, followed by shouting and violent pounding on our front door. I, being curious but also scared out of my mind, creeped up to my second floor window and peered out at the front yard and an obstructed view of the porch. This was all I could see, and aside from hearing a regular stream of cursing and more pounding on the door, I had no clue what was going on for what seemed like hours, but in reality was probably only 20 minutes. Finally, and quite startlingly I might add, my brother came bursting into my room to ask if I was okay. I told him yes, but what the hell was going on? He told me this. Some weirdo was at our front door. He had knocked, aka tried to break down, our front door, and my dad heard and went to go see what was happening. He peered through the glass and saw the man on our porch, to which he asked what was wrong, without opening or unlocking the door. The man answered,
"They're after me,"
repeatedly while glancing back behind him. My dad, seeing that there was no one behind him on the dimly lit street, asked if he would like to use our phone. He said yes, so my dad grabbed our house phone and handed it to him through the doorway he had cracked open. The man then tried to push his way in, but thankfully my dad stopped him and shut and locked the door. He then proceeded to call the police, on the phone the man had opted not to take. That was the story up to the point where my brother came to check on me. At that point, the man had started screaming profanities, yanking the door handle back and forth violently, and pounding on the walls. And then, I heard the shatter of glass. The man had taken a chair from our front porch, and thrown it through the front window, which led to my parents' bedroom. I don't remember, but I'm pretty sure I was bawling at this point, knowing for sure that he was now in our house. And remember, I woke up to what I thought was a gunshot. I thought about how he was going to kill my parents first, and then run up the stairs to kill me and my brother. My mind raced at all the horrible things that could be happening downstairs, when amazingly, The police pulled up right at that moment. They immediately came into the house and detained the man. Apparently, he had climbed through the window, cutting himself on the glass, and crawled on all fours through my parents' bedroom and through the kitchen, finally ending up on our living room floor, where he just laid down and bled all over our carpet. He didn't have any weapons on him, despite my original theory of him having a gun. I guess I thought, in my rudely awakened state, that the pounding on the door was a gunshot. He was apprehended before he did anything to anyone in my family, thankfully. We think he was just some druggie who was hallucinating that someone was chasing him. No charges were filed, and we never saw the man again. After the police and ambulance left, my dad cleaned up what he could of the bloody mess, and we all went to bed. Unfortunately, all of us forgot about my little sister, who was in the downstairs bedroom in the back of the house. No one had gone to check on her, and no one told her what was happening, so she spent the entire night cowering under her blankets, thinking something could still be happening. Oops. We have all since apologized to her. So, that's my story. Even though it was the most frightening experience of my life thus far, at least something good came of it. Since he bled all over our carpets, our insurance paid for new carpet, which we already desperately needed, and it was enough to carpet several rooms, way more than were actually ruined. So there's that. I was around that time in my life where most kids my age would stop trick-or-treating, either because they thought it was lame or because their parents told them to stop. Me and my father had a similar conversation, and in the end, we decided that this trick-or-treat would be my final one. So, when October 31st came, my dad helped me paint my face to look like a zombie. I figured that this costume should be simple, yet something I liked, so zombie it was. I grabbed an empty pillowcase and headed out, with my parents telling me to be back by 11ish. Before you ask, yes, I was going trick-or-treating by myself. I was able to convince my parents that I needed to get as much candy as I could, seeing as I wouldn't be able to do this again next year. So off I went, running from house to house, shoving candy into my pillowcase as fast as I could. So by the time it got dark, my pillowcase is about 3/4 filled, and I had no intent on slowing down. As I'm about to walk into a new neighborhood, a black van pulls up to the curb that was a few feet away from me. The door opens, and out of the darkness comes some guy in a hockey mask and tattered jacket, wielding a machete. He turns his head towards me, probably just trying to creep me out. "Nice Jason costume," I say, trying to be friendly as I begin to walk past him.
Thanks, zombie. You want some candy? I've got bags of them.
He says as he pulls out these little white sacks of candy. So I, being the idiot 14-year-old I was, opened my pillowcase and let him plop 2 or 3 sacks into it.
Make sure you eat them real soon. You'll love them,
he snickered, which really sent a chill down my spine. He left as quickly as he came, but I just shrugged it off as I needed to finish trick-or-treating. I continued down the road, again going from house to house for candy. After about the 3rd or 4th house, I noticed something odd. It was the same black van from before. After every house I went to, the van would get closer and closer. At around what I could only guess was 10:30, I headed home with my sack full to bursting. As I walked, the area behind me illuminated. I turned around, expecting to see a car that would soon pass me. It was the van, and in the driver's seat was the same Jason Voorhees, who gave me the candy. My heart stopped, and I broke into a mad dash back to my house, the van easily keeping up with me. I was luckily able to lose him by running into the woods near my house. I exited the woods that led to the side of my house, and looked for the fake rock that held the spare key to our home. After I got it, I put my candy on the kitchen table, and somehow found a way to go to sleep. The next morning, when I woke up, my parents were sitting at the kitchen table, digging around through the bags of candy that Jason gave me. They started asking me where and who I got the bags from, which started to freak me out. I would later learn that the bags of candy were nothing more than just bags of prescription drugs. There was a ton of sleeping pills in them, and I finally understood his intentions. He was going to follow me until I fell asleep, then do God knows what with me after he got me in the van. Now that I think about it, I'm not sure whether or not the machete he had was fake. The police came up empty-handed, so I guess I'll never know his fate. If you're reading this, Jason, let's not meet again.
So when I was young, I went to that one house in town where the residents went all out and probably spent thousands of dollars getting the place perfect for Halloween. Now this place was insanely well done, and I mean really freaking good. Albeit, even as an adult, it competed with professional haunted houses. I believe the year was either 1999 or 2000, because I went as Darth Maul. I remember being literally scared out of my mind the previous few years, and I hoped the badassery of my character would provide me with some sort of courage. They blocked off the scene with a black tarp, and had everything you could ever want to see at such a house. A psycho shower scene with a zombie crawling out of the toilet, ghouls and imps climbing the tree, blood, gore, strobe, spog, everything. I remember feeling terrified, even with my double lightsaber. Even though I was scared to death to walk through it, I always admired the workmanship, as I knew that the props they had were either really expensive or took some good effort to make. To this day, I have never seen anyone have as horrible a yard as they did. As always, every year, I saw the house owners sitting on their porch, reveling in the terror they brought to the neighborhood and handing out candy. So as I nervously crossed the yard, past flying banshees and impaled corpses, I noticed the main attraction at the end of the line. There, on what I guess was probably the driveway, was the bottomless pit attraction. The illusion bewildered and chilled me, and though it was only lit by a lone light bulb, it made the box glow like a low-burning furnace. I must have stared at it for a while, when suddenly I heard a cough and a low-hushed voice to my right. I don't really remember what was said, but I want to say it sounded something like,
"Hey, check this out."
or
"Hey, I want to show you something."
in a gruff, hoarse tone. I looked over and at first saw nothing but the wide gate to what was clearly the side of the owner's house. There was just a faint amount of light from the glowing pit to illuminate the outlines of the gated fence. After adjusting my eyes, I noticed a figure standing completely still. In fact, it was so still, I remember thinking it was just another static prop. My young mind just didn't register a lot of this, and was still looking for the voice I heard, not realizing it had come from the figure, who I could still only barely make out. After a few moments, I heard the voice again. I realized it came from the figure and began to approach it. This was obviously a stupid idea, but in comparison to everything else that was happening around me, this figure seemed anything but imposing. So I cautiously approached the figure, trying to make sense of it. Suddenly, the figure began to move, and consequently I froze solid. The light from the amber glow lit up his face, just enough for me to make out his features. This I remember clearly. It was a scraggly and rough-looking man, with a coarse gray beard and yellow teeth. His weathered and tattered clothing looked like it hadn't been cleaned in ages. He was smiling at me, though I had no idea why. But it unsettled me greatly under the hellish glow of the light bulb behind me. It felt wrong. It was as if, at that moment, I had acquired some clarity and realized his presence here obviously was not part of the show. And considering I already saw the owners, clearly did not belong on the property. I screamed and ran out of there as fast as I could to the exit, not looking behind for a second. I probably got a few looks from the other kids around, but as I found my parents waiting outside, I told them about the man I saw. I saw one of the owners approach and ask if everything was alright. I said something like, I didn't like the old man by the gate. He looked at me for a second and said, "What man?" I never went there again. Let's not meet, creepy shadow man.
Halloween is my favorite holiday. Is, not was. Despite the events that unfolded one crisp Hallows Eve when I was about 16. At the time, I lived with my parents, younger brother, older stepbrother, and cousin in a big but old house that sat in a cul-de-sac close to Main Street. Behind it ran an alleyway flanked by apartments, and it had a huge yard that my basement bedroom looked out on. We lived in a small town, crime seemed minimal in the area, and I'd made my way out that Halloween night to make the most of the best day of the year. It wasn't just what happened that night though. It was, of course, what came after, and one small incident that came before. A few days before Halloween, my stepbrother and cousin arrived home to discover a pickup truck full of dudes taking photos of our house. Weird, but when approached, the men seemed friendly and complimented our Halloween setup. It was pretty great, that was true. The men sped off without incident and were quickly forgotten. My stepbrother and cousin re-entered the story Halloween night, the big event itself, at about 3 a.m. Both had been out drinking with their friends, and as such, both had left their respective vehicles and braved the icy walk home on their own. My cousin arrived home first, but couldn't seem to get his key in the lock, so he just sat on the porch bench and waited for my stepbrother to show up. He did, about half an hour later. After having a bit of a laugh at my cousin for being an uncoordinated goober, he went to unlock the door himself and no luck. So they bit the bullet and called my mom, waking her up to let them in. And she was, of course, unimpressed to be opening the door for a pair of drunk idiots at this time of night, and didn't buy their story about the wonky lock. They insisted though, and to shut them up, she finally relented and tried her key. She too could not get her key into the lock. Annoyed, tired, and now just confused, she wrote it off as a problem for tomorrow, and the three of them hit their respective hay. One other person arrived home late that night, me. Though I arrived much earlier than those two and was in bed by about midnight. I woke up close to 1 a.m. Still tired, all I could feel was anxiety, and I didn't know why. At first, I tried to tell myself that I'd just gotten a bit too into the holiday spirit and had psyched myself out. But then, I noticed a shadow. It was perfectly man-shaped and cast upon my window. I turned on my bedside lamp, blinked, and it was gone. It wasn't unusual, mind you, to see the shadows of people harmlessly walking through the alley, and I told myself that's all it was. Then there was what happened after. I came home from school the next day. My parents were there, so was a locksmith, and so were the police. My parents were there because, well, that's where they lived. The locksmith was there because my mother had called him, as the confusion over the broken lock persisted. The cops were there because the locksmith and my parents had called him, when the locksmith proceeded to pull the tip of a knife out of our lock. I was relieved to see that's where the knife tip had ended up though, as they discovered 2 of our window screens had been slashed. One on our garage, and one on my bedroom window. These events happened in October 2003. I was 10 years old and in 6th grade. Where I'm from, the middle schools got out after the elementary schools and high schools. My friends and I knew that we would have to immediately start to trick or treat if we wanted to get candy. Remember, Halloween in 2003 was on a Friday. This excited us. We could hit every house we wanted and didn't have to worry about school the next day. After school, our parents picked us up and drove to our friend Alex's house. He lived on a road named South Harold. To the left of South Harold was an identical street named South Concord. At the end of one side of South Harold was a turn that brought you onto Concord. On the other side was a main road. Alec lived closer to the main road, so our plan was to start at his house, go to the main road, then turn up and go down Concord. After that, we'd go back to Harold and return to Alec's house. So we began trick-or-treating. There was probably about 12 of us, but the notable ones were myself, Alec, Nate, and James. We had been accruing a great deal of candy when we got to this fateful house. It wasn't unlike any other house. 2 stories, a garage, front lawn, etc. However, there was a Michael Myers statue, or so I thought, in the front lawn. We went up to the house, got candy, and then examined the statue. It was holding a knife and was hunched over. James decided it would be a good idea to kick it in the shin. Suddenly, the statue jumped and began holding its shin. We were frightened that the statue was actually a dude.
"I'm gonna fucking kill you,"
said the man. Obviously, plenty of people claim to want to kill someone and not really mean it. We just assumed that it was an idle threat and continued on our way. At around 8:30, it was pretty dark out. I lived up north at the time, and anyone who lives up there can agree that it gets dark pretty quickly. Anyway, we were still collecting candy when Nate and I began discussing the science behind slasher films, like who gets offed first and whatnot. One of the people we were with, who was in the middle of the group, dropped his bag. We all stopped and waited. Now, the person had to turn around in order to pick up his bag. When he lifted up his head, he began to squint as if he was trying hard to see something. We all turned around to see the man in the Michael Myers costume walking behind us. It was odd. No one else was with him. Hell, we were the only group on the road. And he was still holding on to the knife. When he noticed we were looking at him, he quickened his pace. Being stupid preteens, we booked it. Looking over my shoulder, I realized that he started running too. Fortunately for my slow ass, he was a decent length behind us. Our luck even turned more in our favor when a minivan stopped at the end of Concord. It was one of the people I was with's mother. We all piled in and quickly told her someone was chasing us. She drove us back to Alec's house. What makes this even worse is that Alec and Nate told me that the man was still roaming the streets after we had all left. I don't think I really have felt so terrified. I honestly have never left the house on Halloween since. Now, whether or not the knife he had was real or not is irrelevant. It's one of those things that I had no intention of knowing, just in case it was real.